Hey, good morning and welcome to the 1836 studios. I'm Michael Quinn Sullivan. I get to be sitting here like I was last night for way too many hours. It felt like we were sitting here watching election returns, but with Brandon Waltens, the managing editor of Texas Scorecard. Obviously, a whole lot went on last night. A lot of really good things if you're a Republican, a lot of good things if you're a Democrat. It was a very interesting evening. And for the next few minutes, we're going to spend some time talking about what happened in Texas. And no doubt you and I will probably get distracted by some squirrel that will go running past. We'll talk about the other about other places too. Great to see a lot of folks who have joined us both on YouTube and on Facebook. Great to have you with us. If you have questions, comments, throw them there into the into the comment section, and we will try to address those kind of things throughout our time, either here live or once we end the program. So Brandon, I think for a lot of us in Texas, we all very early were saying, Robert Francis Beto O'Rourke can't win governor. But yet, the folks who live in 90210, the folks who live in Northern Virginia, the folks who live in New York City, the skateboarding, 50-year-old trust fund kid. He's a white guy with a Hispanic nickname. We'd love it if he was the governor of Texas.
Right.
They poured in all that money. But it feels like kind of what we saw was, in many ways, a return to the kind of the Texas norm of statewide elected officials getting, having double-digit victories over Democrats.
Yeah, and looking at the reaction, I think the people who were most surprised or at least showed the most, oh, wow, Greg Abbott pulled it off in Texas, were people who didn't live in Texas, right? They were kind of out-of-state national commentators saying, wow, Beto lost again? That's incredible. Of course, that's what we have been seeing and saying now for quite some time. And actually, look at those numbers. Not only did O'Rourke lose that race, but he lost. It looks like he's going to lose by 11, 12 points, which is on the high end of predictions going into this. Right. It's actually just about the same margin right now that Abbott beat his 2018 opponent, Lupe Valdez, by. Keep in mind, Lupe Valdez spent about $200,000.
Lost her gun to sheriff, and she's
O'Rourke
a total
has spent
mess,
million, I think, raised up to $75 million or something crazy like that. And so it just goes to show you, first of all, it goes to show you money, I guess, in this situation was not enough to push Beto O'Rourke past the finish line. But I think there's also another important takeaway, which is, looking at all of those statewide, there was such a prediction that Abbott would be out ahead, that he would be leading the field, and that people like Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick or people like Attorney General Ken Paxton would be sort of straggling on a few points behind. You look at the results as they're in now, they're all actually pretty tight, right? They're all within 9, 10, 11 points, right in that margin. And so there really wasn't this prediction coming true that people would maybe vote for governor and then split and vote for a Democrat for lieutenant governor or something like that. That just didn't happen, right? Because that usually doesn't happen.
Right. Well, and in many ways, this is should be taken, I think, by certainly maybe folks watching this, but your neighbors who put faith and stock in the left-wing crony establishment media, who were kind of selling their fever dreams as news and polls with this idea that Beto O'Rourke is gonna he's gonna get closer, that he's gonna get maybe even win by 1 or 2 points and then blown out. Dan Patrick with all these great Republicans who you've never heard of endorsing the Democrat. Dan Patrick is vulnerable. He wins by 10 points. Ken Paxton, according to Texans for Lawsuit Reform, Ken Paxton has no chance of winning the primary. Ken Paxton has no chance of winning the general election. He wins by 9 points. You keep going down the line. Sid Miller, 10-point lead. Glenn Hager, actually the comptroller of Texas, who 90% of people don't even know what a comptroller is, but yet Glenn Hager won by even more than Greg Abbott won by. So this was, in many cases, Texans saying, whatever's going on in the rest of the country, we're taking care of Texas.
Yes, and when you translate that down the ballot, right, so looking at those state legislative races, certainly interesting to see that Republicans, when they come back, when the legislature comes back in January, they're going to actually have increased their lead. Okay, you pick up John Lujan, who was elected in a special election earlier this year, but it was a small turnout special election in a normally Democrat district. John Lujan is going to be headed to the legislature. Of course, Ryan Guillen, who had switched parties, was a Democrat, is now a Republican. He won re-election. And so Republicans are coming in there with an 85, 86 vote majority in the 150-member chamber. The only Republican we really saw go down last night that was perhaps expected to win was up in Collin County with Jamie Jolly in a newly redrawn district where this is actually notably, I think, the first Democrat seat that Democrats have been able to take in Collin County now in quite some time. Several years ago, you would have said Collin County is a reliably red county. And it just goes to show you a little bit of how that urban sprawl sort of, moving into those suburbs goes. We talked a little bit about that same phenomenon with Williamson County last night. But overall, Republicans heading into this next session with an even bigger majority than they had before. If there was one missed opportunity when it comes to the Texas legislature, I think you'd have to say it was the seat in South Texas, the Senate seat in South Texas, where Republican Adam Hinojosa just narrowly
by like half a percentage point.
Just narrowly failed to beat a Democrat in what was expected to be a Democrat seat. And so that's certainly one I think people are going to be analyzing for a few days.
Yeah, and folks who may have read the Texas Minute this morning, if you don't read the Texas Minute, you go to texasscorecard.com, click subscribe, and get the Texas Minute delivered to your inbox every weekday morning. This morning I noted in there, Brandon, that that race maybe in particular is going to force a little bit of a reckoning in the GOP elite, or at least it should. You had Texans for Lawsuit Reform, the largest single political action committee in Texas. They throw out money. They act like they are God's gift to Republicans, although they give a lot of money to Democrats. They're in SD 27 in that La Mancha versus Hinojosa race. They were the number one donor by a lot, by 3 or 4 times the next closest donor to the Democrat, a liberal trial lawyer, leftist. Just go down the line, checks all the boxes for the Democrats, and yet Texans for Lawsuit Reform was their biggest donor. And you just have to think if they had stayed out of the race, or if they had done the right thing and given to a businessman, Adam Hinojosa, he could have possibly won that race with a few more resources. And it's always easy to do the Wednesday morning quarterbacking or whatever, but that is going to be a race. It's going to cause some questions to be had. I would also suggest when you look at that Collin County race, this is where I think that the incumbent Republicans there in Collin County are going to have to do some real serious soul searching. Jeff Leach, who is I guess now maybe the dean of their delegation, Collin County, Matt Shaheen, and a couple of these other cats who've all been playing footsies with the Democrats. They're all okay with appointing Democratic chairs. Jeff Leach came out in bold support of House Speaker Dade Phelan just before the election, despite Tony Tinderholt, a more conservative fellow, running against Dade Phelan for Speaker of the House. And I think that if they're not careful, they're going to be giving voters the opportunity to say, well, gosh, if our guys think Democrats are so cool, maybe we should too. And I think when you look at a Jamie Jolly winning, when you see that Jamie Jolly race, it makes you think that that maybe voters there in Collin County are starting to think, well, gosh, if it's okay for Democrats to be committee chairs, maybe it's okay for Democrats to be state reps. And that's why I think Republicans have got to have a real serious kind of huddle and figure out what is our messaging here. Because you can't, on the one hand, tell voters, vote Republican, and then have the first thing you do is make sure Democrats are running key committees in the Texas legislature and holding leadership positions in the GOP-dominated legislature as voters have expanded the majorities in both the Texas House and the Texas Senate. Great to see a lot of folks watching. Stacy, notes that now everyone talks about East Texas, South Texas, and the big urban areas. No one talks about West Texas, where there was a big red wave. And State's absolutely right. I mean, you saw West Texas perform really strongly. I think I don't think many folks thought there was a realistic chance of Democrats picking up a seat. There was rumbling about Lubbock being in play and other things, and so those are that is certainly a big source of good geographic news. But the population of Texas, whether any of us like it or not, and as a West Texas boy, I don't necessarily like it, but Harris County continues to be the behemoth, and Brandon, Harris County, as expected, was a complete dumpster fire yesterday.
Well, I'd say it continues to be a dumpster fire. We still don't have really the full set of votes there. We'll keep in mind, you had polling locations in Harris County that were told by a Democrat judge after Democrats botched, I think it would be safe to say, botched the rollout of the new paper ballot backups that they have in Harris County. You had a Democrat judge saying, okay, we'll keep these polling locations open. Supreme Court of Texas actually came in and said, no, sequester those ballots, for now, but just close, the polling places at the normal time. So this whole mess. And then as expected, right, we didn't start seeing Election Day voting coming in till I think around midnight, right? And we're still seeing some of that trickle in. And, this is a county that Democrats really took a stronghold in 4 years ago as part of that 2018 blue wave, right, in Harris County. And since then, it's been a hard place for Republicans to shake that off. It certainly seemed like this year would be the opportunity. That the biggest race there that people have been watching is that race for county judge, with Lena Hidalgo running for a second term against Alex Mueller. Right now, Mueller's behind. I think there's still some election day voting coming in. It looks like probably more probable that Lena Hidalgo will be getting that second term.
Yeah, and just sticking with the mechanics for just a moment, the mechanics of that race. What you saw there was of that election. What you saw there, of course, was the Democrats completely mismanaged, as they have now. Our own Aaron Anderson reported on this about a week ago, noting that there in Harris County, they've changed out the faces, but they haven't really changed out the procedures and the processes, and so that when you looked at at what happened, and there's some great video that was posted, 2 o'clock in the morning or something, a guy, pulling in a wagon of ballot boxes at 2:30 or whatever in the morning, from a polling place, blocks away. And and those are the kinds of things, Brandon, that make folks not have confidence in the elections. A mutual friend of ours was an election judge in Harris County at a polling place that they didn't have enough paper. All these things. You got one job. You have this office of elections that exists, and the election's coming, and yet you don't buy enough paper. All these kind of things are what make very reasonable people say there are problems in our elections.
Yes, and absolutely. That's going to be something that the legislature is going to have to grapple with when they return. I know a lot of, they passed an omnibus election integrity bill last year. A lot of Republicans sort of wanted to be done with the issue, especially people like House Speaker Dade Phelan. But this is not an issue that's gone away. This continues to be a top priority of the Republican Party of Texas heading into this session, and certainly seeing what we saw, particularly in Harris County. There's going to continue to be a big push from voters saying, look, we want to make sure our elections are secure. Which brings us to, I think, a bigger point looking forward, which is, we've set the stage here, right? Republicans had some pickups. There was a little bit of there was the loss in Collin County, but overall, Republicans heading into this next session with a stronger mandate than they did even 2 years ago. And the question now is, what's next, right? So Republican candidates won. Will the priorities win as well?
Yeah, and again, I think this goes back to that question, Brandon, of are Republicans going to continue to cede leadership in the legislature to Democrats? The expansion of majorities in both the Texas House and the Texas Senate, the double-digit lead that every single statewide Republican had, all should scream to Republicans, hey, Texans really want you to deliver. And whether you're talking about real property tax relief, or you are talking about election security, you're talking about child abuse that is being more and more rampant in sexualization of children, all those things have to be on the table. And the other real interesting thing from last night, Brandon, that we saw was the competition that is now absolutely not rhetorical but real, coming from Florida for being a conservative acting state. It is noteworthy that Florida, that 22 years ago was the site of the famous hanging chads and all the questions over elections. Their elections went off really well, and what did they do? They banned the mass mail-in balloting schemes. They severely limited a lot of the non-election day activities, and they actually set up a statewide team to go in and address problems the moment they arose. And so as a result, they had very few problems. Meanwhile, you've got a governor and a legislature there that have been very actively delivering on the promises they've made to their bases. And as a result, Ron DeSantis had a 20-plus point win over not a skateboarding trust fund baby, but after a very experienced former Republican governor, who then switched parties and became a Democrat U.S. senator. This guy knew Florida, knew how to campaign, and yet DeSantis just mopped the floor with him. All those things should say to Republicans in Texas, we better get our act together, because we're not going to be able to beat our chest nationally and say we're the most conservative state when Florida is producing conservative win after win after win.
Yeah, and that's certainly going to be something that shades the coming months, coming year, as we head into this legislative session. Before we go here, we've talked a lot about Texas. What do you make of the national trends last night? Looked early on, a lot of talk about a red wave. It certainly looks like
you and I talked about a red wave.
We talked about it. Yeah. Well, yeah, we won't. You don't go back and look at that. But certainly a lot of those predictions seem to not come to fruition. What do you make of that?
Well, I mean, certainly there's always the problem of a win has many fathers and a loser is a bastard, right? And I think you certainly see that from last night. But I think as you look nationally, there are a couple things at play. Number one, I think that Republicans did what Republicans often do. They got a little too cocky, a little too fast. And I think that you ended up with folks maybe thinking, oh, we've got this in the bag, so why do you need to fight? You keep swinging until the referee pulls you off of your opponent. Just keep fighting. Don't stop fighting. Don't ever give up. Don't stop. Don't stop. Don't stop. Second, I think that in some of those areas, we are going to have to ask some very uncomfortable questions that we don't want to ask about election security, way elections were run. It is very troubling that the nation of France is able to somehow do paper ballots and have their election results within a couple of hours nationally without problems, and yet in Arizona, in Maricopa County, they're saying, oh, we're not going to have results. Oh, maybe we'll have results for you on Friday. Those kind of things lead to all sorts of rampant speculation, particularly when the person overseeing the elections is the Democratic candidate for governor. All those kind of questions should make us really nervous. Those are the kinds that undermine folks' confidence in our system of self-governance. But then, lastly, we can't get away from the fact that Republicans end up with some really weird candidates. And I think a lot of us got kind of pregnant with the idea of, how bad, for example, Fetterman was. And I mean, the guy's a walking vegetable. It's very sad. It's abusive in my mind that they've allowed him to continue to be a candidate and now a U.S. senator. But yet, his Republican was this, squishy milk toast moderate, who was really not much better up until the point they had to be rhetorically better.
Right.
And I think that when, maybe a lesson for Republicans here is, either we offer clear distinctions, if you're a Republican, offer clear distinctions, or don't try. Because voters are smart enough to realize, well, gosh, if my choice is a Democrat or a Democrat light, I might as well get a Democrat. When you go to the grocery store, Brandon, and you've got the name brand cereal and the off-brand cereal, and they cost the same thing, you buy the name brand cereal.
Yeah.
And that's what everyone does. And I think politics ends up being something similar. For Republicans to win, we need to have folks who are offering real clear difference and clear choices. That's I think why you saw Texas perform so well.
Yep.
Is that you did have a lot of folks offering clear distinctions. Greg Abbott, bless his heart, a guy who's been in office and been governor for 8 years. He made a calculated decision to move away from vague promises and get very specific about things like property taxes, get very specific on crime issues and other things. So, and as a result, voters said, oh, great, fantastic, let's go. Whereas in other states, I think you saw the Republican Party and Republican candidates kind of playing that, let's massage our message to appeal to left-wing voters who hate us. Oh, that'll go over well. All you've done is discourage your base and make folks maybe less interested in voting for you. When a lot of the predictions, Brandon, of the red wave were predicated on generic ballot questions, where you say, hey, if you've got a low tax, pro-strong borders Republican running against a big government, open borders Democrat, who do you vote for? Oh, I vote for the Republican, voters said. Okay, but that's from the generic ballot. But then you get to the reality where you've got the Republican who's kind of wishy-washy. Voters say, well, gosh, I didn't agree to voting for that. I wanted the real thing. And I think that this election is just one more exhibit in the trial against moderating as Republicans.
Well, I know you've talked about it before, but today, the Wednesday, the day after Election Day, November 9th now, this is the time when a lot of politicians will likely, they want people to kind of, okay, you've done your job, you've elected me, now it's time to go away. We know that the opposite is actually true, that now is actually the time for citizens to double down and get even more involved, especially as these people go make decisions, make laws, head into the legislative session, that now is the time for folks to get more involved. And of course, we're going to be covering all of that heading into the legislative session, during the legislative session, et cetera. We're going to be highlighting all of that at TexasScorecard.com, ways for people to be engaged in the process. So thank you so much for joining us for this stream. If you have any last minute questions, feel free to drop them in there, try to get to them after the program. For right now, thank you for joining us. Have a great day.